Let me begin with a number that should stop every policymaker, technology executive, and parent in their tracks. 3,500. That is how many AI-generated child sexual abuse videos were discovered last year alone. Not rumors, not hypotheticals, not future risks. Discovered, documented, and investigated. This is not a story about technology racing ahead of regulation. It is a story about how systems failed to anticipate, prevent, and respond to one of the most dangerous abuses of emerging technology. What makes this moment especially alarming is not just the scale, but the speed. Artificial intelligence tools capable of generating realistic video content are becoming cheaper, faster, and more accessible. The same technologies celebrated for innovation, creativity, and efficiency are now being weaponized to fabricate material that exploits children without ever requiring direct physical access to a victim. That shift fundamentally alters the threat landscape. It expands the pool of offenders, complicates detection, and challenges existing legal frameworks that were built for an earlier digital era. Here is the first uncomfortable truth. Current laws were not designed for synthetic abuse. Many legal systems still rely on definitions that assume the existence of an original recording or a real-time act. AI-generated material blurs those assumptions, creating gray zones that bad actors are quick to exploit. While the harm to children, psychological, reputational, and long-term, is very real, enforcement mechanisms often lag behind the technology producing it. That gap is not theoretical, it is being actively used. Equally troubling is the role of online platforms. Detection systems were built to identify known material, not endlessly customizable synthetic content. Moderation tools struggle to keep pace, and reporting mechanisms remain inconsistent across jurisdictions. Meanwhile, the sheer volume of content overwhelms investigators, forcing law enforcement to triage cases in ways that leave gaps no one should be comfortable with. This is not a failure of effort, it is a failure of preparedness. There is also a broader societal issue at play. We tend to frame technological harm as an unintended consequence rather than a foreseeable risk. Yet warnings about misuse of generative AI were raised early and often. Safeguards, watermarking, access controls, and stricter deployment standards were discussed, but frequently postponed in the name of innovation and competition. The result is a reactive posture, where action follows damage instead of preventing it. What this discovery demands is not panic, but resolve. It requires international cooperation, updated legal definitions, mandatory safety standards for AI developers, and significantly expanded resources for child protection units. It also requires a shift in accountability, where responsibility does not end with the end user, but extends to the systems that made large-scale abuse possible. Let me close with this. Technology reflects the priorities we set for it. When protection lags behind profit, the most vulnerable pay the price. The discovery of thousands of AI-generated child abuse videos is not just a warning, it is a test. A test of whether governments, companies, and societies are willing to act before the next number is even higher. Silence, delay, and half measures are no longer neutral choices. They are decisions with consequences. AI-generated child abuse material is a growing crisis. The discovery of 3,500 AI-generated child sexual abuse videos last year represents more than just a numerical increase in illicit material. It signals a fundamental shift in the nature of exploitation and the challenges faced by law enforcement, policymakers, and society at large. Unlike traditional abuse content, which required physical access to a victim, AI-generated material can be created without ever putting a child at immediate risk. This technical distinction, however, does not reduce the gravity of harm. The circulation of such content perpetuates abuse, normalizes exploitation, and can be re-traumatizing for survivors whose likenesses or identifying features are used without consent. It also introduces entirely new dimensions of scale and speed, as the tools to generate realistic synthetic videos are widely accessible and increasingly sophisticated, allowing perpetrators to produce content that is almost indistinguishable from real recordings. The sheer volume of these discoveries underscores the growing demand and circulation networks for such material, reflecting both technological accessibility and a failure of monitoring systems to keep pace. Where traditional distribution channels could be tracked through known databases, AI-generated content can be endlessly modified, repackaged, and disseminated in ways that evade automated detection. Each new video represents a potential expansion of illicit networks, as synthetic content enables distribution without geographic or physical constraints, making law enforcement interventions more complex and resource-intensive. Equally concerning is the way this development alters the offender landscape. AI-generated content reduces barriers to entry, enabling individuals who might not otherwise commit physical abuse to participate in illegal distribution or consumption. This increases both the number of perpetrators and the potential exposure of children to indirect harm, including the use of their likenesses or the targeting of vulnerable populations for the creation of synthetic material. The risks are compounded by anonymity and encryption, which shield offenders from accountability while simultaneously amplifying societal exposure to harmful content. This phenomenon also challenges traditional frameworks for prevention and intervention. Policies and legal structures designed for material derived from physical abuse are often insufficient to address the synthetic dimension, leaving regulatory and enforcement mechanisms one step behind. While AI offers enormous benefits in education, healthcare, and industry, its misuse in producing exploitative content illustrates the necessity of proactive governance, cross-sector cooperation, and public awareness campaigns. Without comprehensive strategies to address both creation and distribution, the proliferation of AI-generated abuse material threatens to become a persistent and escalating problem, requiring urgent attention from all stakeholders involved in child protection. The rapid emergence of AI-generated child sexual abuse material has exposed a critical gap between technological capabilities and existing legal frameworks, revealing that laws were not designed to address the unique challenges posed by synthetic content. Traditional legal definitions of child exploitation rely on the presence of an actual victim and a tangible recording of abuse. AI-generated material, however, can fabricate realistic depictions without involving a real child, creating a legal ambiguity that complicates prosecution. Courts, investigators, and policymakers are often forced to navigate untested interpretations of obscenity, exploitation, and consent, leaving offenders with opportunities to exploit gaps in the law while authorities struggle to establish jurisdiction, evidence, and culpability. This disconnect underscores the urgent need for legislative reform that accounts for technological evolution rather than retrofitting old frameworks onto entirely new forms of criminality. The challenge is compounded by the speed and accessibility of AI tools. Whereas the creation of traditional abusive material required direct access to a victim and technical skill in recording and distributing content, AI software enables almost anyone with basic digital literacy to produce sophisticated synthetic content within minutes. The law has historically assumed that abuse involves physical acts and tangible evidence, but AI-generated material exists in a virtual domain, infinitely reproducible and alterable. This raises questions about intent, dissemination, and the definition of harm in ways that the existing statutory language does not address. Prosecutors must grapple with whether creating a synthetic depiction constitutes the same level of criminal liability as producing material derived from real abuse, and whether possession of such content should carry equivalent penalties. These debates are ongoing and unresolved in many jurisdictions, creating uncertainty that can slow enforcement and embolden offenders. International disparities further complicate legal response. AI-generated content crosses borders instantaneously, while national laws and enforcement mechanisms remain fragmented. In some countries, legal definitions explicitly exclude synthetic content, while others are beginning to consider it under broader obscenity or child protection statutes. This inconsistency allows perpetrators to exploit jurisdictions with weaker regulations, creating enforcement loopholes that undermine global efforts to prevent abuse. Effective mitigation, therefore, requires not only domestic legal reform, but coordinated international standards, cooperative investigation, and information-sharing agreements that account for the borderless nature of AI technology. Beyond statutory gaps, there are challenges in evidentiary procedures and investigative protocols. Existing forensic methods are geared toward identifying, authenticating, and tracing recordings of actual abuse. Synthetic material requires entirely new tools for detection, verification, and attribution, law enforcement agencies must develop expertise in AI-generated content, implement advanced algorithms for detection, and train personnel to interpret digital evidence that does not fit traditional categories. Without these updates, the legal system risks falling behind the technology it is meant to regulate, leaving a growing class of offenders unaccountable and children exposed to potential harm. Online platforms play a central role in both the proliferation and the mitigation of AI-generated child sexual abuse material, yet current detection and moderation systems are struggling to keep pace with the volume and sophistication of content. Traditional methods for identifying illegal material rely on matching known images and videos against databases, using hash-based detection to flag previously recorded abuse. While effective for material derived from real victims, these tools are largely ineffective against AI-generated content, which can be uniquely produced, altered, and repackaged in ways that evade automated recognition. As a result, harmful material circulates more widely, often for longer periods, before being detected or removed, increasing exposure and complicating law enforcement response. The scale of the challenge is staggering. AI tools enable rapid generation of synthetic content, creating thousands of variations that differ slightly from one another, each potentially slipping past conventional moderation filters. Platforms face the dual pressures of addressing this risk while maintaining user engagement and privacy, a balance that often leads to inconsistent enforcement. Automated systems are prone to errors, both in failing to flag content and in overblocking legitimate material, while human moderators are overwhelmed by the sheer volume and sensitive nature of content they must review. The result is a reactive system in which harmful material is frequently removed only after significant circulation, rather than being proactively prevented from appearing online. Complicating this further are inconsistencies across platforms and jurisdictions. Some companies have invested heavily in advanced detection and reporting mechanisms, while others rely on minimal compliance measures, creating uneven protection for vulnerable populations. Legal obligations vary widely, and enforcement priorities differ by country, meaning that material removed on one platform may persist elsewhere. This fragmented environment allows offenders to exploit weaker systems, migrate content between services, or share material via encrypted or private channels. The effectiveness of platform-based safeguards is therefore contingent not only on technological capability, but also on coordinated policy and regulatory frameworks which remain underdeveloped in many regions. Another critical factor is the need for platform accountability and proactive intervention. Relying solely on user reporting or retrospective moderation places the burden on victims and communities rather than on those controlling the infrastructure. AI-generated abuse material presents unique risks precisely because it can be produced and disseminated without direct contact with victims, which challenges conventional assumptions about culpability and monitoring. Platforms must implement measures that combine sophisticated AI detection, human oversight, and cross-platform cooperation to prevent harm before it occurs. Without these measures, the technological advantages that make AI a powerful tool for innovation simultaneously create unprecedented vulnerabilities, leaving children exposed and law enforcement perpetually in a reactive position. Despite repeated warnings about the potential misuse of generative AI, preventive measures have often been delayed or deprioritized, creating conditions that allow the proliferation of AI-generated child sexual abuse material. Experts in technology, law enforcement, and child protection raised concerns early in the development of advanced AI systems, emphasizing that these tools could be weaponized to fabricate illegal content at scale. Proposed safeguards, including digital watermarking, access restrictions, responsible licensing, and ethical deployment protocols, were discussed extensively within the tech community and among policymakers. However, these measures were frequently postponed in favor of rapid innovation, commercialization, and competition, reflecting a prioritization of growth over safety and leaving society exposed to foreseeable risks. The delay in implementing preventative controls illustrates a broader tension between technological progress and social responsibility. AI developers often operate under intense market pressure to release new tools quickly, showcase capabilities, and secure intellectual property advantages. In many cases, this competitive environment discourages the incorporation of safety features that might limit functionality or user access, despite clear warnings about misuse. The result is a landscape where sophisticated tools are widely available without accompanying safeguards, enabling individuals with malicious intent to exploit the technology before effective oversight mechanisms are in place. Public policy has also struggled to adapt in a timely manner. Legislators and regulators often lack the technical expertise to fully understand the risks posed by AI-generated content, leading to reactive, piecemeal interventions rather than proactive regulation. Even when guidelines or best practices are proposed, enforcement tends to lag behind development cycles, leaving gaps in compliance and accountability. This gap between warning and action illustrates that the creation of protective frameworks is not automatic. It requires deliberate attention, coordinated planning, and the allocation of resources to anticipate potential harms before they manifest. Societal awareness and public discourse have similarly lagged. Many stakeholders, including educators, parents, and the broader public, remain unaware of the scale and nature of AI-generated abuse, limiting pressure on companies and policymakers to implement strong preventative measures. The perception of AI as a neutral or beneficial technology often overshadows discussions of risk, creating an environment where harmful applications can emerge quietly. This combination of delayed safeguards, insufficient regulatory frameworks, and limited public engagement has contributed directly to the growth of synthetic abuse material, highlighting the urgent need for proactive, coordinated, and well-resourced prevention strategies. Effectively addressing the crisis of AI-generated child sexual abuse material requires a comprehensive approach that extends responsibility beyond individual users to include developers, platforms, regulators, and international bodies. Relying solely on law enforcement to react after content has been created and disseminated is insufficient, given the speed, scale, and global reach of AI-generated material. Responsibility must be distributed across all actors capable of preventing harm, ensuring that the systems enabling exploitation are held accountable alongside those who directly engage with illicit content. International cooperation is essential because AI-generated content is inherently borderless. Perpetrators can produce, share, and consume material across jurisdictions instantaneously, while national legal frameworks and enforcement capabilities remain uneven. Without coordinated international standards for defining synthetic abuse, harmonizing penalties, and establishing reporting protocols, offenders can exploit regulatory gaps and avoid accountability. Collaborative mechanisms, including data sharing, cross-border investigation units, and aligned legal definitions, are necessary to ensure that enforcement keeps pace with technological advancement and that global networks of abuse can be effectively disrupted. Regulation must also be forward-looking rather than reactive. This includes updating legal definitions to explicitly encompass synthetic content, imposing mandatory safety requirements for AI developers, and creating robust auditing mechanisms to verify compliance. Developers and technology companies must be incentivized or legally required to implement access controls, detection algorithms, watermarking, and other preventative features that reduce the likelihood of misuse. By embedding safety into the design and deployment of AI systems, platforms can mitigate risks before harmful content proliferates, rather than relying on post-hoc moderation that often fails to address the underlying vulnerability. Adequate resources for child protection units, law enforcement, and investigative agencies are equally critical. Detecting, analyzing, and removing AI-generated material demands specialized skills, advanced digital forensics tools, and sustained funding. Without these investments, even the most comprehensive regulations will be limited in their effectiveness, leaving vulnerable populations exposed and investigative processes reactive rather than preventive. Finally, accountability must extend to public and private institutions that influence the ecosystem. Platforms must take proactive measures rather than deferring responsibility to end users, and policymakers must integrate child protection priorities into broader AI governance frameworks. Public awareness campaigns, education for parents and children, and collaboration with civil society organizations further reinforce these measures. By distributing responsibility across all relevant actors and embedding prevention at multiple levels, technical, legal, institutional, and societal, the systemic conditions that enable AI-generated abuse can be addressed more effectively, reducing both the creation and dissemination of harmful material.